pretty good implies I'm probably going to do things 2 and 3 times when I miss a washer. Oh boy. Wind's coming through. It's like raining pine cones on me. Just getting bombed out here. I just hope it doesn't decide to rain again. This will be... Come on, don't rain again. That's gonna look pretty cool on those 21s. Not bad at all. That was always coming. All right, it has been it's been a minute again, and really it's been the rain. Trying to get everything painted and cleaned up and ready for reassembly. It's raining, it's super humid, there's wind, there's pine needles. I mean, I'm painting outside, so everything just tries to dump on what you're working on. So that has been a challenge, but the weather's turning on me, so it is time for me to kind of make the call and move forward here before everything gets so cold building outside that your fingers are freezing. So here's where we are at. We've painted the wheels for the what's going to be the front tires here. These came off of a blaster, a 21-710 on a 4x156 bolt pattern. To get these to go on, we have these two spacers that go from 4x110 to the 4x156. Because the existing hub's on the front, I couldn't find a hub to work with. I mean, maybe I could have ripped something off a blaster that had like the leftover brakes, etc. But this is where we're going for now. Oh, painting. So the rear rack we've done in a high gloss black. I had originally thought to do this in pink, but I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. And the A-arms, these were the kind of beat up silver that came, and these came together quite nice. And this is one coat of self-etching primer and one coat of high gloss black. This is what we're using here. This self-etching primer, this high gloss on the black. And where we were doing the pink, I did a coat of self-etching followed by a coat of white primer. And then this pink. And here's what I want to talk about as you get to see this color come together on the frame. It really does look quite awesome, especially as the sun's coming out a little bit here. This high gloss neon pink, I'll tell you though, not sure I'll ever do this again. So painting is about the preparation work and trying to get this chassis ready for paint. All the nooks, crannies, all the crud that was on there. I didn't have a sandblasting rig, so I did this with wire wheels and paint stripper wheels and just kind of brute force. Not the way to do it. Really, if you're gonna paint it yourself, I would still suggest taking it to somebody if you don't have a sandblaster and getting it sandblasted for the prep work side of it. But even then, rattle canning something like this is a pain in the tuchus. Putting the primer on, easy. And then the self-etching primer, then the white primer, easy. The mistake I made was the pink paint. This stuff goes on like saran wrap. When you look at this cap, it's almost kind of a semi-transparent. Yeah, so that's probably 8 coats on there. So it was a bad pick on the paint. I like the way it's coming out. It definitely has some vibrant pop to it, but it was like just wrapping in saran wrap. It's like you wrap again, and hoping the saran wrap is eventually going to give you a solid base color. There's a lot of coats on that, so Bad pick, but I was looking around for other pinks, and everything else I was finding for pinks really was looking like more of a purple or really kind of a flat. It lacked that special pop that this has. So that changed the plan a little bit, because I was going to do some of these other pieces in that pink as well. This is what's the only piece that's going to be pink. So now we're going to have the upper, rack coming off the back will be in black. We have our A-arms in black. We have our wheels in the high gloss black. And then some of the rest here we're cleaning up with SC1 hubs, the rubbers to cover the on the front spindles. We've cleaned up the seat belts. I still have to do paint on some of these other rack pieces. Those will go in a high gloss black. Those will go in black. Wheels, so same thing. These only about half painted. They've had the self-etching and a coat of white. These are blaster hubs. And so these are a 4x100 pattern. Little unusual, but we have a lot of blaster wheels and tires around that we can use. So it made sense. So rather than trying to buy wheels and matching or spacers that might convert the rear 4x110 to 4x100, for example, buying the spacers would probably run me $140, whereas a blaster hubs ran me about $40. So this is great. I'll say this though. So I picked the 4x100 for the blaster. The spline pattern is the same on many ATVs. So you could also go and get a hub set off of a Yamaha, like a YFZ 450, same spline pattern, but a 4x115 bolt pattern, which is a much more common wheel coming off of ATVs. 4x100 is a little unusual. So you could pick the hub according to what wheels you have access to. Make that easy. Here, we're using the fronts because we have the conversion, the 4x100. We'll sit in. First time getting this in here. And when it's fully painted, that's going to be the pop that comes through with the wheels sitting on it. I think that's going to look pretty cool on a black high gloss with this pink coming through. And the same on the rear. You'll effectively have, well, something like that. These wheels I'm playing with, these are off of the Yamaha Big Bear. And interestingly, the Yamaha Big Bear is a 4x110 bolt pattern. So I had these left over from the green ATV back there that I built for my mom. The difference is that the center hole here, whatever millimeter size that might be, doesn't fit here. You see, this one's bigger, so it really just can't lock itself in. So I probably won't use these. But point being, if you're going to do this, take some time, because if you've got wheels and tires lying around, you probably have a number of options. Another thing to call out. The front spindles. I thought I was going to get smart in the first video and drill a hole and put a Zerk fitting on here. But what I found is this center is sealed off. It's just an air chamber in there. What these had, it seems to be that they had some rubber boots, and I've been unable to find replacement rubber boots that would sit down over here and hold the grease in. Not a good situation for the long term, because eventually this is going to get full of dirt and grime and it's going to wear out. You'll have to replace these. Having a hard time finding exactly these, but I do believe that I could get a unit off of a more current generation Kart and fit something else in. I just need to have the right step down. I'm guessing right now, but that looks like a 3/4 inch to a 1/2 inch step down for the hub. These guys. And not a great paint job. I really struggle getting these clean to paint, but behind here is the seals and bearings that step down, so we got more work to do there. But like I said, I am running out of good weather, so it's time for me to just make some calls to get this thing back together, rock and roll. So today's that day. Here's the goal. Let's see if we can get the front suspension back on. That'll be the front brakes. If we can get this front end bolted back together, it's a short hop and a skip to get the rear on, then it's sitting back down under its own weight, and then we keep going from there. So here we go, guys. I should mention one more thing as I'm getting going here. I do have a printout of the illustrated parts model for this 6150 here. Handy reference, even for things like this unit doesn't have an oil cooler. That'd be kind of neat. But as I get into doing the front suspension, I get a blowout diagram of how things are assembled. This is great because even though I have done things like this before and have a pretty good idea of where things go, pretty good implies I'm probably going to do things 2 and 3 times when I miss a washer, like down here around the brakes, putting the right bolts in, getting the springs in the right position for gas and brake. Inevitably, you'll get it all together, and then you will have missed something like an end cap, something like that. So this is great because looking at this, I'll have a reference on the left here of what bolt, tie rod end, and here we go. For my long bolt, I'll have an end cap, and I get a chance to look at the bushings. I don't want to forget the bushings going into my A-arms. This will be handy so that in theory I don't do things 2 and 3 times. So that said, let's find my parts for my first set of A-arms. 2 bolts plus I need, just like we're saying, 2 of the end caps. And 1 end cap's going to be larger, fitting over. And then 1 smaller to the other side. There we go. Larger, smaller. That'll cover that. Shocks. We have new front shocks. We have these guys because the other ones were like pogo sticks, and ultimately to get all the shocks matching the same color at the end of the day, we're going to do a wrap. Reason being, the rears have yellow, these are red. I think it just looks funny. So we will wrap the shocks and they'll all look black. Let's see, I need bolts for the shocks. I left them in the old shocks. Sometimes I like to do this so I don't lose hardware. I've actually decided that I'm going to do the steering first. I am reusing the bushings, reusing the bushings that came off. So I'm going to put a little waterproof grease in here, get each of these tapped in, and I'm assuming that they will tap in. Otherwise, I'll get sandpaper and a burr and go through there to clean that out. Then we can get the steering wheel in, we'll get the chain and all that linkage in. I think it's just going to be easier to do the steering mechanism before I get all the front suspension on here. And I'm working on the tarp because the ground is soaked because, well, we had quite the rainstorm again last night. You can rebuy these bushings online. So they weren't in that bad shape after I tapped them out. Coming back here to reference, this is the gear that will go on the bottom of the steering, and as I dial in, I know it's tough to see, but I know I need an M8 bolt, and number 9 here is an M8 22 millimeters, so about 2 centimeters. About 2 centimeters is going to be this guy, but I need an M8 washer, and I don't have an M8 washer in my pile here. Chances are it's probably in the bottom of my tumbler and I haven't found it, so I'm going to my bag of spares, see if I can dig something out. And there we go. There's a nice M8 washer right there. So let's use my handy dandy birthday present. Anne Marie got me this guy. This guy is great. Alright, so the steering wheel in, and forgive me, I held up the wrong bolt. I didn't hold up an M8 bolt, so this is the M8 bolt on here. So what we did, there's a little dimple in the top of that steering wheel for it to be straight up and down. Bolt the sprocket on here, and then in the middle of this chain behind my finger here is where the steering mechanism attaches to. So we want this mechanism in the center, otherwise your steering wheel would be off to an angle. So lining that up straight, getting the chain with its connection marking or connection linked right in the middle here, and with that I was able to get enough free play on this other gear to bang it over the end. Now, get my washer in play and my locking circlip. Now we're going to find out how hard is it going to be to get the steering armature on here. And I'm going to do that next again before I get all of my supporting suspension structure in. So to show, mocking this into place quickly here, this armature bolts in. Your tie rods will run off left and right, but it's this guy back here that ultimately is the challenge to get. There's threads in the armature, so we have this guy feeds down through, threads in, and I guess there was a locking nut on the back. If I get that, and then I'll get my locking nut on here, then we're going the next step. But I'm taking off these tie rods because I have replacement tie rods, and there's still play in these that I'd rather not leave in there. I'll highlight this. On the bottom of each of these tie rods is this dimpled out washer, the inner side of the washer going up. There we go. All right, let's get this, let's see if we can get this piece bolted in. So I like these articulating wrenches, and these ones I can lock so I can get different angles. These are great. So it's in there, and you'll see that there's no nut on the back of this. I can't find anywhere in the manual that I have anything that shows how that part of the steering mechanism connects up. I don't like there not being a locking washer on the back of there. With that articulating back and forth, that feels prime for turning the steering wheel to loosen that little bolt up and that to pop out, and then yeah, then you lose your steering. I'm gonna find a longer one, and I'm gonna put that locking nut on there. I'm pretty sure that's how it was when I took it off, but I don't like that. So let me go back through, adjust that, then we're on to the suspension, which is kind of exciting because that's when it starts to take shape. So yeah. So I went back on it again because the bottom is threaded there rather than threading through and then doing a nut on there. But I did go touch it with some Loctite, and oh boy, wind's coming through. It's like raining pine cones on me. Just getting bombed out here. I just hope it doesn't decide to rain again. Come on, don't rain again. You know, I missed a spot on both of these. I thought I was doing good, but both of them on the bottom. I can't let that stand, so I'm gonna slow down for a moment and just cover that up because that'll bug me, because that's so easy to fix that it has to be fixed. These pedals need a little finagling because this spring has to go into a recess hole down here. So you got this catch slips into the slide there, and then this L, I'll call it, goes into a hole on the frame. And then you've got to get funny trying to hold everything under spring tension and line it up. I've got one pedal in. There we go. All right, slowing down for a little bit to take a lunch break, but I turned the camera off for a moment here after doing the foot pedals, and now I'm going to show you why, because I had some learning to do on one side of the suspension, and now that I've learned my order of operations and I have that right, I can show you and build the other side with you. So here we are. We have one side on. Now the toe in is too much. We'll adjust the tie rod. But let's show you this. That's gonna look pretty cool on those 21s on there, and the steering doesn't feel too heavy right now. So going through, there is really an order of operations to get all of this in and still be able to access the back of nuts and bolts, etc. You know, greasing the bolts that go through, get the end caps in, getting this all set up and done now. And then I've also had to learn some things with my spacers. My spacers are a standard thread pattern, and the hubs The hubs, which in this case are the pink, are a metric thread pattern, so I had to get a little fancy to get everything to work there, which essentially means instead of having these beveled nuts inside holding to the hub, I have the original ones in there, and there's not a ton of bite, so I think I'm going to try and find an M10 one pitch with this bevel to go in to hold there, and then we can do better on that front. But doesn't that look awesome with that pink popping through with the SC1 finished, I don't know what even to call that, but covers my bolt in there, my axle bolt. So I'm gonna have some lunch and then we'll do the other side together. Should go easier for me. And at that point, we're able to move on to the back, but I tell you what, that is pretty cool looking already. All right, had some lunch, back out now to do the other side. So I'll walk you through here. So tie rod is all fastened, steering's fastened, the other side is done. So the next thing to do is going to get my lower A-arm in, my upper A-arm in, my shock on, then we'll step out to putting the spindle on. And at this point, I'm expecting things will move pretty well. Having done one, I know what I need. The parts are all laid out here. Got my bolts, I've got my end caps, I've got my grease, I've got my nuts for the spacer and the wheel. We have the hub, we have our cotter pins, locking washers, castle nuts, everything for the spindle, the A-arms. I've got my tools, I've got my wheel. Let's see how efficient this other side can be. Clean set of gloves, bottom A-arm. That's gonna be this guy. And it's gonna fit in fine on this side. The other one I had to tap in. This one's got a little bit of play. Take my first bolt. Oh, and the reason it has play is because I don't have the end caps on. The big hole in the end cap goes on the front side. Smaller hole, back side, and still it's gonna go in fine. Might even hang there with a, nope, thinking with a little bit of tension. But next, let's get this bolt. And I'm using a different glove that has grease on it, so I don't grease up the gloves that I'm using to try and keep everything clean. And I'm just giving just a coating. That's all that is. Good. There it is. Nut on the back. I'm just going to hold the nut, zip this in. Good enough. All right, top. As you look at the mount here, this would be upside down. This way has it, you know, when it's at its angle, sitting level in there. If I went like this, I'd be trying to mount my spindles at a weird angle. So that's how that side's gonna go. Again, the big hole in the end cap goes forward. Small one on the back. I should also note that there are bushings in here. I didn't take them out. I left them in, painted around the edge. So having greased my A-arm bolts, they'll go in, but there are bushings in here. Grease the other side. And I am having pine needles everywhere today, so it is entirely possible I'm going to have a pine needle inside my suspension. Just a little taste of Vermont there. Okay, end caps are on. We're right direction oriented. Let's see how well this one's going to fit in. Not bad at all. That was always coming. We're building on an angle now. Dan, you want to give me a hand? See if I can get this back up, because I got to turn the steering to be able to get this nut on the back.
What do you want me to do?
All right, now with the hardware for the other shock. The spindle has this kind of square cutout that sits down flush in. Make sure that's in there. Once it is, washer, castle nut, and cotter pin. I'm going to grease a step down axle on that and get my grease glove on. And we have a washer, we have a castle nut, and we have a cotter pin. Okay guys, fast forward, have a little bit of time, another afternoon here, and we have the front end pulled together. I have bolted on the rear end, which I'll show you here, and I'm having a bit of a tire dilemma, and I guess I'll show you, we'll talk through what's going on here. So here we are. I bolted the rear end back on. Fairly straightforward, really. It's 2 bolts, and with the center on blocks up underneath here, just rolled it up. 1 bolt in, the other bolt in, both same for both sides. Voila, you're ready to go there. It's been a big debate on the rear wheels. The fronts, as we've talked about, are 21, or what's the size here? This is a fairly standard ATV tire, 21/7/10, which is 21-inch diameter wheel, 10-inch diameter wheel, 21 overall, 7 wide, the depth of the tire. Now I have a lot of stuff left over we're trying to use here. These turf tires that came off of it, these are 18, 9.5 by 8. These are on a 4x100 bolt pattern. 4x100 bolt pattern. So this is the same bolt pattern as the Blaster. Let's start with that discussion. Blaster hubs, 24 tooth spline, fairly common for Yamaha. This is an M10 bolt on a 1 pitch, and these could go in, should drop right in there if we're actually, oh, excuse me, I said this incorrectly. This is the 110, 4x110. Yeah, this is a 4x100. So talking through here, if I want to use something different than these turf tires, swapping hubs. That's why we have these hubs. For the winter time, I have these Sandstar tires, these ITPs. These are great. They're sand tires, but they're great in snow. 4x100. So I can drop this guy right down in there, and we have hubs. And this spline count, the 24 spline count, is the same as the spline count that is on this axle on this go-kart. Okay, starting to think things through. I don't want to use these in the summertime. I'll wreck the paddle fins. So I'm looking at what I have. I have leftovers from the Big Bear. This is the burned out Big Bear parts quad we used to get pieces to get my mother's back on the road under the tarp over there. Bigger bolt pattern. These are 1/2-inch bolts on a 20 pitch, so they're standard versus metric. And these hubs for the Big Bear, this is a 27 tooth spline. Excuse me, I got to back up a little bit. The Big Bear Yamaha is still an M10 one pitch, but the splines are different on the Big Bear 350, 27 tooth. So I can't use this hub. This is another 110 bolt pattern. So trying to figure out, so a 110 bolt pattern. Great, the 110 bolt pattern. This is the hub that came on the Kart with the tire from the Kart. I can take this, and the bolt pattern would fit in this Yamaha wheel. So we could use this, but these great big tires that came off the Big Bear, this is a 25 by 10-12. That would undoubtedly mess with the gearing compared to these guys being an 18 to 25. I mean, that's a big difference. That'd be cool, but let's do it. Let's slip it on and see what it looks like. As I slip this on, I should mention two things. One, this center orifice here, eyeballing this probably about 50 millimeter. I expect this is probably 75 millimeter for this circle here to sit down flush in a wheel. Give some extra stability. In this case, 75 millimeter, if this is accurate, is not going to fit through here. So I don't sit flush. So everything is sitting on the studs. The other thing that I should mention, these studs would not be right for here. You want real lug nut studs that have the taper to hold everything square and center. This would just wreck threads and really not be great. If I were to do this, my best shot is lug nuts with the taper because I'm not going to get this inner recess in here for that extra stability. But it would look something like this. And I mean, that's pretty crazy looking there. 25 on the rear, 21 on the front. Once everything's on the ground, see how it looks. I mean, I'm up in the air because I don't really want it to be all raked out like that. I'd like it level at least. The other thing I want, if I had my way, I'd have the rear as wide as the front, and hard to capture on the camera here, but the front is still maybe 2 inches wider or so. I can be okay with this. Man, those are big tires. Here's my other option. These are off the Polaris Trail Boss parts quad. This one had 2 Trail Bosses. One still sits around the corner there as I decide what I'm going to do with what's left of it. These are 1/2-inch 20 pitch bolts, and I'm not sure measurement on this orifice here. Again, that looks like 50 millimeters or so. This tire fits the vision more, a 22 11 by 10. Can I get a hub that would work on this? So here's the Polaris hub, and you can see from, if I put these side by side, the M10 versus the 1/2-inch. These are great big beefy lugs. But this would have been fantastic. But the splines on the Polaris, it's 1 spline less than the Yamaha. 24 splines, 23 splines. So I can't use this hub. That's the most unfortunate piece, because I could have just slipped this right on, reused these bolts. And this is a, what is this? Is this I think this is a 4x100. Yes, it's a 4x100 bolt pattern. but different studs to different fit. So even though I have a 4x100 here on the M10s versus the 1/2 inch, let's see if this would actually sit in the Yamaha wheel. Also recognizing these little dimples here are really the equivalent of what would sit in the recess in the wheel. Those dimples are, that's 75. So you would need a 75 millimeter circular center, we'll call it, to your wheel. And as I look at that center and this one, that looks small, 75. I do think that's 50 millimeter. So let's see what happens here. I'd come in from the other side because I don't want to have my fill on the inside of the go-kart. Like that. I can drop the 100 right down in. You see this play? That play wouldn't happen if I were able to set this down in flush if this was a 75 millimeter hole. My only way to use this wheel is to get my hand on actual lug nuts that have the tapered end so that I could hold this centered in there. I have ordered the tapered lug nuts, but you know what, as I look at this, boy, I'm not even sure. Maybe, yeah, it looks like I could hold it quite centered there. So that's the thought. The tapered lug nuts will come in and I'll put those on, and it seems like I have 2 options here kicking around without having to spend any money. Both of those options are going to rely on the lug nuts to anchor the wheel to the hub, because the center hole, it doesn't align, whether it's 50 millimeter, 75 millimeter, even some of the bigger ones here I think might be closer to 90 millimeter. That one I think is 90 millimeter. So that's the decision. So the cool thing is we'll have some options. We can put the turf tires on, 18 inch, lots of torque. We can go for the middle with the 22s, which I think is the size it's going to go, because 22 is pretty close to the 21. I really would actually rather have a 20 on the back, would probably be perfect, but I don't have it. Well, those are 20s, but those will rock in the winter. And then here we have the 25s. I think that's going to be a lot of heavyweight rotational mass. Great for top end speed, but if you're in the woods and you want torque, not thinking it, but we'll actually try. We're going to try 1, 2, 3, 4 different tire sets as we get going. The only one I don't expect to try is this guy. Now these were given to me with the burned out Bear quad, burned out Big Bear 21-710, so it's a fairly common ATV front tire, but the bolt pattern doesn't really match much of anything. Here we go, 50 millimeter in the center, and that looks like a 110. I'm gonna check. Here's my Big Bear 110 hub on 27 splines, and drops right in there. So yeah, it's a 110. I don't have any other hubs that'll work there because of the spline count. This wheel and rim is out for this project. So today what I'm looking to do actually is just a small amount here, but get the electrical plugged back into the back, get the brake lines run back up, and get the shift linkage forward, neutral, reverse wired back up. I think I can get the pedals wired back up. So we'll get all the linkage in, electronics in, and then we'll see where we are at that point. But that would be a nice little win to move that forward today. So here's the layout. As we had taken things apart, just going in reverse here, we have the throttle cable laid into the, I guess that's the driver's side under seat track. We have the electrical laid into that under seat track, and we have the hydraulic line for the rear brakes. The hydraulic line I can squeeze right through the crack here. However, I have realized I do have to take the pedal back out to get the hydraulic line underneath the pedal here. And I'm going to do that rather than disconnect the hydraulic line from the master cylinder, because then I'd have to bleed, and I don't have to do that. I can just pull this and slip it under there. Then we'll get the throttle cable in, which will be simple enough. Up top, we'll get the rest of the electrics back in, the light switch, the kill switch, and these ones hanging off here are the headlights. We're going to leave that out of the way for the while, the green, brown. Now, if you remember, one of the reasons that I decided not to send this out for powder coat was because I had difficulty getting the wiring harness out. Wiring harness is fed through this tube here, and there was no clean way of doing any of that because these connectors were all on after the fact. I would have had to cut the harness, pull it all the way through, and really just find a way to get it all back through using a snake or something. And instead of doing that, you saw I had this in a plastic baggie for the work. Now let's see, the other side, passenger side underneath, is the mechanism for forward, neutral, reverse. Couple of screws on here that'll be taken off, and it'll bolt back to this post in the center. Electric runs up around the battery box underneath this shield here, or excuse me, the engine frame. Now remember, as I walk through these, grounds. So we have a ground coming off the harness and a ground coming off the battery, this green one here, that goes to the engine. So this is going to have to go back to that engine bolt in the back there. Up top here, it's fairly self-explanatory. The red, thick red comes off the battery right to the solenoid. Then you have the other red here with the inline fuse. This runs up to the electrical system, key on, etc. Also goes to solenoid here. This way, when you click on, you get power through. Coming off, or signal into the solenoid, also coming back into the harness. Only one plug this can fit into here. Wiring, yellow, red, but then the other colors change. Red, white, stripe to green. You have a plug, again, the only plug that can fit. This is the rectifier, or the regulator for charging the battery. Coming off the motor harness here, and there's a plug because this is an electric carburetor. You have a lead coming off this guy, and it's blue to blue. This one here, I'm going to have to dig. I'm not sure this one was plugged in, but I have not found a missing wire for it anywhere. Let's see, talking through, you have this other connector off that same harness that runs back towards the carburetor motor side. We have over here, coming off our spark plug, that's going to be this guy, green, black. So we're going to thread him over, get that guy plugged in, stick him over here for now. This one that's just hanging, I believe this looks like this was a kind of a remote kill switch or a motor kill switch that sat here on the back. We're not going to use this, and we haven't been using it. And leaving it open is working fine, I believe, and I can test this later on, but if I short these, would probably kill the motor. This, again, not 100%, but this looks like a tail light to me. I bet you I would get 12 volts off of this. Finally, the CDI, and all of this sits down on this plate here, which then has a protective cover. So I'm going to get this all bolted in so the electric is good. I'm going to get my front brakes put in by popping that, get this stuff bolted on, and then I'll come back and we'll keep talking. Okay, just about there. Pop the cable, hydro cable underneath, set our cotter pin in for our master cylinder. There we go, brakes. Master cylinder bolted right back up top here, all good. Underneath, 2 threaded 8mm bolts hold it down to the frame. Putting the gear select back in. It's 2 bolts under the cover here, 1 and 2. They just hold to this tab, and then finally there's a through bolt that will have this spring cup and then nut on the outside. Put that on now. Voila, done. And that spring just pinches all this outside housing on. And I think I did it too tight here because I can't move my gear selector. Let me back that out. There we go. That'll work. That's fine. That spring under there is what presses your shifter into the detents here so you don't pop out of gear. There's the throttle cable run all in there, and if I need to take slack out, I can either, I can adjust this guy out to take slack out, and I can shift this whole mechanism one way or the other to accommodate. There we go, boom. Yeah, gas and brake. Pretty close to doing a test fire here. Let's get this bolted in. Literally just held in by a threaded plastic washer over the key mechanism. Not a whole lot, but I guess it doesn't need a whole lot. It does beg the question though, where did I put the key? So after hunting around and trying piles of keys I have in the shed, it was in the bag. That would have been funny if that's the piece that I couldn't find. There we go. That does imply though that the other 2 keys in my hand, that I don't know what those go to. So I guess I'm not completely out of the woods on that. Okay, looking this over, boy, yeah. Got to pop a battery in, and the fuel tank has to be rigged up, and that fuel tank would mount to the bracket there for the rear. That one's ready to go. We'll sit that one down on there. But the gray one you're seeing, I intend to paint black, is what the tank sits on. I might just hold it up there and see what I think. If I think that the gray or the silver rear end still looks fine. And if I like all that, we'll bend these tabs down to hold the cabling in place. And, ooh, we're getting close, guys. I missed a spot again. Son of a gun. Anything upside down? I gotta touch this up. Gotta touch it up. Gotta. Alright, I just held that and hit that with a couple of touches on the bottom. You know what actually I'm learning is that the tank mounts directly to this one on this bracket, not that silver one. The silver one's the luggage rack. So we should be able to get the tank in once I let this dry for a few minutes. Let's just set this down. Oh, son of a gun. Going backwards. It took me a second here. I'm going like, there's just no way the tank lines up. The tank wasn't sitting on the supports, it's hanging on the supports. That's why I gotta hang the tank. So in the tank, mounting hardware are rubber grommets, and these dowels press into those rubber grommets. They were a little difficult getting out. They were a little beat up to try and get back on here. So the grommets aren't all in there. Each side has one of the metal the rubber grommets are all in there, but each side only has one metal dowel in it. But the tank is nice and snug. So now let's get the frame, the upper roll bar bolted in. These went through the tumbler, nice and clean. Get one on each side with these kind of beveled big thick washers. And then the top is secure. I'm using a punch to get everything lined up here rather than taking a mallet and whacking on my new paint job. Yeah, that was the right call. Tell you what, this cleaned up hardware going through the tumbler, looking pretty nice. All right, guys. All right, I think it's time for a test fire. You know, I was gonna put it down on the ground to see the stance. I really wanted to get these 20-inch tires on, even though I'm not gonna run the summer, because I want to see what it looks like on the ground. But right now, with it up in the air, I actually could engage the gears, go forward and reverse. So let's do that. I have to attach the battery, and then we get to see if I got the electrical back in correctly. Give it a couple of cranks and see if she goes here. Hey, ooh, tried. Boy, that started right up. So that's a nice place to be. I got a lot of play in the... Oh, I have an idea too. I know what I can do about this. I was about to say I got a lot of play in the cable here, but down here I have a return stop I can put a bolt in to keep this from coming all the way back, so the pedal sits about there, which is right where the slack comes out. So I'm gonna find a bolt and a nut and get this guy set and tuned, because I can't take any more slack out on this end, or the other end, which would be here. All the slack is out, so I've got to move the pedal to adjust that. I'll also show you this while I have it here. So I got a bungee on the battery. This is great. This is just a tarp bungee. I like these batteries that have these LCD readouts on here, so I can see the voltage in the battery, 13.6, so fully charged. How many days this battery's a brand new battery, 1 day. But what's also nice is when you're on and running, if your stator is charging the battery, you should see this sitting around that 13, 14 volts. Let's see what that looks like. Turn it on. I don't know if you saw that, but it's jumping up. We're charging the battery, 15 volts. Now with the engine off, 13, yeah, fully charged battery. It's kind of nice on these batteries, and really they're no extra money, but you know what your battery charge is as you go to start, and if you just glance down that when you're running, you know your stator's working, you know your regulator rectifier's working, so you know your charging circuit's good. So I think that's a great one there. Starting to make it through here. Let's cover up our electrical on the back. Do that. And we got some considerations on the seat. We still have all of this to go through. Covers for the chain in the back, seat belts, and I still have pieces to paint, but I'm waiting on some paint. But yeah. Those wires I was mentioning, exactly, there was a back an engine stop switch over here. So when you would depress the switch, it would close the circuit, kill the engine. Probably identical to the front one here, wherein if you press it in, it kills the engine. To run, you have to be out. And this is the headlight switch. Let's see what it takes to put the seat in. I got to remember some of this because Josh was here to help me do it. And he'd be here helping me, but I've been fighting the weather and the rain, so sneaking in when I can. It's getting cold and wet fast. We're now the middle of October, and it's starting to get cold on the fingers out here. It's funny, it was such a pain to get that seat out, but literally you set it in and slide it back, and underneath here, down these rails, they just hooked right in. And then I think you can see I have my through bolt options. We'll do that and the seat's in. So I have more Clinton painting to do. Rest of the roll cage still needs paint and cleanup. And the luggage rack needs to be cleaned up and figure out the tire situation. But what I really want to do is I do really want to drive it and get a feel for the gearing on these 20-inch. I don't think it'll be bad going for those from those 18s. And honestly, I'm probably going to clean up the 18s, paint the rims high gloss black to match. Just got to wait for the paint. So I've got more painting to do once the weather cooperates. But let's see what 20s do. I tell you what, that squat there feels just about right. 20s in the rear, 21s in the front. I think this is gonna look pretty cool. I almost feel bad to put muddy boots in there. So, but let's start it and let's try and drive it around the lawn without getting mud all over our half-finished project here. Oh, the other thing, you remember these had yellow shock springs on it. Just trying to tie together the color scheme, and I didn't want to replace the shocks and spend the money, so these are just shock wraps. The idea is to keep the mud out, but it pulls this color scheme together so you don't have the big old rusted yellow sitting there. It's a cover-up. It is still the old yellow shocks under there, but they have good recoil, they have good rebounds, so they're still there. And I'm not putting my cover on my chain right now. I'm gonna ride it like this so I can see, because I gotta clean that up and lube that. But let's give this thing a spin, shall we? You know, I didn't just romp on it, but it had no problem pulling me uphill and around, even at slow speed with these 2-inch bigger tires. So I think 20s are going to be just fine on this guy, and we'll see what the others do. I did notice one thing though, we got lucky here. If I crank the wheel, these 21s are probably as big as we can go, because that's my clearance. A finger width there. And I wonder if I compress suspension. Oh yeah. So 21s are as big as we're gonna go. And if you hit a jump and come down, boom, you'll rub a little bit. Yeah. And the front is on its softest setting, so we can stiffen this up a bit, and we will. That's gonna be something. But if you're turning, well, here's the situation. You've got to be turning all the way when you compress the suspension. Otherwise, you're fine out here. And option 2 is to, well, we've already got spacers on here. So we're already, if we didn't have the spacers, this wouldn't work at all. So the spacers worked in our favor. But I don't want to get it too muddy until Anne-Marie has a chance to see it, because we're not all the way together yet. Let's get this finished so we can get a real good look at it. But it starts, runs, not too bad at all. Always cool when the project finally starts to take shape. It's funny because you can say that the tear down is the easiest part, ripping everything apart. You get it all taken down. And as you get a little better at it, you start to lay things out as you set up for the future, which is the next hardest phase I find, which is the cleanup. Everything is taken apart and you're cleaning, you're polishing the bolts, you're going through, finding replacement parts, fit up, painting, sanding, getting everything cleaned up. And then it depends. The last part can be the hardest, the reassembly, depending on what you're doing. For me, trying to remember where everything goes, find the parts, because I work out here in the woods. I don't have the space to lay everything else out in a nice labeled way. So I do a lot of pulling from memory and just going through slowly. Or it's the easiest part. Everything is clean. The threads are all clean. The nuts and bolts are all clean. And if you've done it before, it just goes together when the tools are there. Yeah, so different stages of it. Well, that's it for now. With luck, next time I'll have all the finishing touches on here, finishing paints, roll cage, all that back on, and we're going to be ready to rip this thing. And we'll have some different tire sizes we can try out, so we can really kind of get a feel for the gearing that is on here and what it can push effectively with this big kid sitting on there. I'll have to go back. I know one of the previous videos has the drive and driven sprocket count, so you'll have your final gear ratio there. But also consider that in here is a centrifugal clutch designed for 150cc motor. So at some point, there's a lot of rotational mass back there that you might just blow up and break something. So we'll see where we land. But I think this is going to be, and from a tire standpoint, I like this.